Today we'll be finishing up composing our piece Lydia's Music Box. If you haven't seen the first few episodes, go back and take a look at those. The idea of this series is that you can compose along with me using the techniques I use to create your own piece. Really exciting today as we've got this fantastic jazz pianist and composer himself named Donnell O'Brien, a great friend of mine, and he's going to play a jazz piano version of this piece. So I'll be making what's called a lead sheet for him to perform the piece. It should be really fun to listen to in that style. Okay, let's jump right in and finish this piece up. The first thing I want to do is solidify the form of our piece. So here we have our A section, and this is our B section. The form we'll be using to complete the piece is known as the Rondo Form. It was developed in the Baroque era where you take an A section theme and alternate it with several contrasting themes. We'll be using a very common version of the Rondo Form, which is A-B, A-C, A. So I'll copy our A section, and then we'll repeat it after our B section. And then I'm going to go ahead and label this as A1. Now, you don't have to repeat this A section exactly like the first A section. You can make small modifications to it, but for now I'm just going to leave it exactly as the first A section. Then we'll add 16 bars and begin our C section. I've been thinking a lot about what I wanted to say in this C section since we last worked on the piece. I want to contrast to our A section, that joyfulness of the dance as our older woman recalls herself as a young person. I think a sense of melancholy works really well here. It's a good contrast to our A section, and it says a lot about our story of our older woman who's opened this music box and it's transported her in her memory back to when she was young. So there's a loss of youth that I want to talk about in this C section. A good way to do that is to modulate to a minor key. Here it would specifically be F minor. Since we ended the A1 section on a C7 chord, that'll be the dominant chord, the 5 chord of F minor, leading us very nicely to F minor for our C section. The technique that I plan to use in this F minor section, this C section, is something that we've touched on in the past. It's called a minor line cliché, and it consists of this type of sound where you have an F minor chord, and you start with the F on the top, and then go down chromatically. So it's F minor major 7, F minor 7, F minor 6. And that chromatic line doesn't have to be at the top of the chord. It can also be at the bottom of the chord, or really anywhere in the chord. So we could play it like this. That falling chromatic line really has a melancholic sound to me, so I think it's going to work perfectly for this. We'll start by adding the chord symbols for our minor line cliché, and I would simply call this first chord F minor. Since I'm going to put the chromatic moving line in the bass, I'll call this chord F minor over E. The next chord in our minor line cliché I'll notate as F minor over E flat. And finally, I'll notate this chord as F minor over D. Now that we have our chords, let's add in our left hand accompaniment using the same pattern we've been using. So here we have an F on the downbeat, then the third and the fifth of the chord on beats 2 and 3. Here it's F minor over E, so our bass note is E on the downbeat. And let's just use the third and the fifth here again. Then for the F minor over E flat, our E flat is our minor 7th, so we'll put that on the downbeat. And then we'll use that same third and fifth on beats 2 and 3. And then finally our F minor over D, so D on the downbeat, followed by A flat and C on beats 2 and 3. You may have noticed that there's one note in particular that was left out of most of these chord voicings. Now in this F minor chord voicing, we have our F natural, the root. But in this F minor over E, there's no F. In this F minor over E flat, no F. Same in the F minor over D. Now though an F could be added to any of these voicings, the reason that I left it off is because on this F minor over E, which would be our F minor major 7, I find that it's a little bit too harsh to play the F. So here we have, with just the E in the bass, with no F in the voicing, it would sound like this, like an E augmented chord. But if I put the F into the voicing, it would sound like this, which may be fine for a lot of different styles of music, but I think for this piece, it's just a little bit too harsh. I may add an F back into these two voicings, but for now I'm just going to leave them as they are. Let's listen to that transition from our C major section into our new F minor line cliché and see if it evokes a sense of melancholy. Yes, I think that's definitely working. I feel that sense of melancholy, that descending chromatic line of the minor line cliché almost feels like a sigh to me. And right now we have that descending line in the bass, but I think we could also try it in the upper voice, in the melody, as we said before. And my idea is to take that descending chromatic line and accentuate it on the downbeat of each measure. So let's give that a try and see if we can write a melody using that idea. I'll start by putting that chromatic line of our minor line cliché as a quarter note on the downbeat of each bar, and then we can write our melody around that. So in this first bar, we're starting with an F, and our target here is this E. So we want to fill in this space between the two. I think I'll use the same rhythm that we use in our A section to start this. So I'm going to make this a dotted quarter note. In this F minor chord, we're not qualifying what the 7th is, so we're free to use the flat 7, the E flat, and that will lead nicely to the E natural in the next bar. So I'm going to put this as an 8th note, E flat, resolving up a half step to the E natural in the next bar. And that's a sound that we've used throughout the piece, so this should work very nicely here. Here I'm going to put an F natural for an 8th note, and that will create what we call in jazz melody writing or improvisation an enclosure. This F down to an E flat and then resolving up to the E. These two notes enclose this note. All right, now we just need one note here. I'll get out of the input mode and we'll try some different options. I'm going to look for a note that's very close to these two Fs to bridge them. I want to have a very smooth line here. Let's try a G. Yep, I like that. That's very nice. Let's try the E flat. That works. That's okay. Let's try an E natural here to approach that F by a half step, just like the E flat approaches the E natural in the next measure by a half step. Oh, I kind of like that. Yeah, I think this is the one. I really like the chromaticism that this note adds. We've got a very nice shape to start this melody. I think what I'm going to try now is just sing with this shape and try to fill in the rest of this phrase. See where my voice takes me. Let's just try that. Da da dee da dum. Da da dee da da. Oh yeah, we could use a C sharp here. Ba-dum. Keep that chromaticism. Let me try that. Dee da 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 dum. Da da dee da 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 dum. Oh, I like that. That's pretty nice. I'm going to put that in and let's take a listen to that. I find using your voice or whatever your instrument of choice is to develop a melody is one of the most powerful tools you have in your toolbox. That combination of the organic, innate knowledge you have of music and melodies, combined with the intellectualism of music theory and these ideas that we've been tossing around, combining those together can really lead to some very interesting and satisfying melodies that fit the emotion you're trying to convey. All right, let's take a listen to this. I do notice that some of my accompaniment is encroaching up into the range of the melody here, but that's fine. We can rework that later. Let's just listen to what we have. I'll back up a little bit. That's working perfectly. It's so interesting to me that we essentially have 4 bars of F minor, but because of this descending minor line cliche, we color this F minor chord differently in each bar, and it gives it a sense of direction. There's not a sense that we've stagnated on this single F minor chord. All right, let's move on and finish off the first 8 bars of this 16-bar phrase. So in bar 9, I know that I'm going to want to return to F minor, so I'm just going to label that here. And maybe we'll even do the line cliche a second time. Now to get back to this F minor, we'll pick the most obvious choice. It's 5 chord, the C7 chord. And as we saw when we're approaching a minor chord, it's nice to label that as a flat 9 chord. Here we have B7 flat 9 going to E minor. So we'll label this C7 flat 9. And I've held that for 2 bars, much like we did here when we went to the F major chord. We had this C dominant sound for 2 measures. All right, now we need to fill in the measures before our C7 flat 9. So as we talked about before, when we have a 5 chord, we can many times put its related 2 chord. Here we have the 2 of E minor, the F sharp minor 7 flat 5. So we could have the 2 of F minor, which would be G minor 7 flat 5. I could put it here. I could have it for 2 bars, but I think I'm going to put it here, and there's a very particular reason for that. The flat 5 of this G minor 7 flat 5 is a D flat, which will work beautifully in our descending line here. We have F, down a half step to E, down a half step to E flat, down a half step to D, and now we can go down another half step to D flat. So we can make this G minor 7 flat 5 over D flat. It would be nice to continue that even farther to go from D to D flat to C, but our C7 is over here. So is there anything we could put in between these 2 chords to keep that downward stepwise motion of a half step on the downbeat of these 2 measures? Yes, there is a possibility. What we could put in here would be something called a cadential 6/4 chord. In this case, this chord would essentially be an inversion of the chord that your C7 flat 9 is resolving to. So it would be a second inversion of the F minor chord, F minor over C. Now, the full name of this cadential 6/4 chord is a cadential 6/4-5-3. But often the shorthand of just cadential 6/4 is used. What that 5/3 is telling you is how the chord resolves. So the 6/4 portion of our cadential 6/4-5-3 would be the F minor over C. Here's our C in the bass, and if we go up a type of 6, the minor 6, we've got an A flat above this. And the F would be our 4, a fourth above the C. That's our 6/4. And the 5/3 now will resolve to the C7 flat 9 like this. Our 6 will resolve down to the 5 of the C7, and our 4 will resolve down to the 3 of the C7. And it will sound like this. And that's why the full name is Cadential 6/4-5/3. I'm going to go ahead and finish up this section. I'll rework this accompaniment so it doesn't encroach on our melody. I'm going to copy our minor line cliche and start that over again in bar 9, and then write a new melody over that. I'll finish off our melody in this section. And one thing I should talk about, since I want you to try this now on your own in this C section, we'll come back and look and see, compare what we've done. One thing I should talk about is what scales to use over this F minor line cliche. Where did I get these notes for the melody? Well, I used some version of F minor over each one of these chords. So here on the F minor chord, we could use pretty much any version of F minor. We could use F Aeolian, we could use F Dorian, we could use F harmonic minor, F melodic minor, pretty much anything goes. But as we move down with this minor line cliche and we see we have the E in the bass here, this is telling me that I need to use a scale like F harmonic minor that contains that E, or F melodic minor. So make sure that you use scales that contain these notes. Here we could use F Dorian, F melodic minor, because these would both have the D in the scale. So really look at that carefully as you're crafting your melody. All right, let's finish this off and we'll come back and compare what we've done. I've completed the C section now and the entire piece. I also made a very small change to the form that I want to show you, so let's take a look at what I've done. Here in the 9th bar of our C section, I repeated that minor line cliche and then wrote a melody over the top of it. For the second half of our 16-bar phrase, I used the same rhythm that we started with, but moved upward with the melody. All of this new melodic material over the F minor line cliche uses some form of F minor, taking into account the notes of this minor line cliche. One thing to notice about the melody over this section of the minor line cliche, as opposed to over this section of the minor line cliche, is that I used a combination of scales to work over a chord in one measure. So here I have a D natural. Well, that D natural comes from the F Dorian scale. So we've got the D natural. But if we move down to the end of the bar, we've got this C sharp, or enharmonically a D flat. And that comes from the F Aeolian scale. And the reason that those two versions of the F minor scale work over this one chord is because they both contain the E flat of our F minor line cliche. So here we have F minor over E flat. And both of these scales that I'm using to create this chromaticism in the melody both contain an E flat. The one small change I made to the form was to add a couple measures of this C chord just to give us a breather before we hit the new C section here. And then finally, I transition back to our A section with the 5 chord and precede that by our A flat 7 flat 5, this time over G flat. Okay, I think it's time to listen to the full piece. So we're going to listen to it in this form now with the piano, and then we'll come back and listen to the jazz version of it with our pianist, Donnell O'Brien. Tonight, I'll be making up a lead sheet for him and sending it to him. In a couple days, he's going to come in and play the jazz version of it. We're going to have bass and drums in it too. And I'll add that to the end of this video so you can hear the jazz version. So first, let's listen to this version, and then we'll come back and listen to the jazz version of it. As promised, we're now going to listen to the jazz version of this piece. My great friend and an incredible piano player, Donnell O'Brien, just did a wonderful job making this piece his own. He did it in a very light and breezy style that I absolutely love. It's hard for me to hear it any other way now. I love both versions of it, but I especially love his version of this piece. So let's take a listen. It's a trio of piano, bass, and drums. And I hope all your pieces came out great. I'll see you next time.